Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're looking at surrogacy options for same-sex couples.
Oh, yeah.
And, we always love to have some source material for these deep dives.
Absolutely.
So you sent over this guide comparing different countries for surrogacy.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed just glancing at it.
Oh, yeah.
It's
It's a lot here.
it is a lot to take in for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But that's great. You've got this guide to kind of break things down.
Yeah. And it does feel like a good roadmap, but just looking at it, it's like, whoa, where do we even begin? How do you even choose the right country when there are so many options?
Well, a lot of intended parents, when they're starting this journey,
Yeah.
I think they prioritize what matters most to them.
Hmm?
Is it legal security or is it cost or is it availability of donors?
Mm.
And then once you have those priorities, it helps to kind of narrow down those choices. Oh, okay. That makes sense. So looking at this guide, I see the U.S. is listed first. I guess it's not surprising given it's kind of the big name in surrogacy, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the United States has a very well-established system, tons of experience in same-sex surrogacy, and comprehensive legal frameworks in place. So you're looking at a really high level of legal security for both parents.
Wow. So that peace of mind must feel amazing, especially with all the other unknowns involved.
Hmm.
But the guide also mentions it's one of the most expensive options.
Yeah.
Are we talking like eye-watering expensive?
Yeah, very significant investment for sure. Think like upwards of 150,000 to 200,000.
Whoa.
Sometimes even more depending on the specific circumstances. You're paying for that expertise and legal security,
Yeah.
but it is a major factor to consider.
Oof. Yeah, that's a hefty price tag. And on top of the cost, there's the issue of wait times. The guide mentions those can be pretty lengthy in the U.S.
That's true. Because it is such a popular destination,
I
there's
bet.
often a longer wait list for surrogates, so you could be looking at like a year or two,
Yeah.
sometimes even longer from start to finish.
Wow, there's a long time to wait. I bet that's stressful to consider.
Yeah.
Knowing you could be waiting years while also dealing with, all the emotional and,
Yeah,
everything else.
absolutely.
Okay, so maybe the U.S. is a bit out of reach for some people, especially with that price tag. What about Canada? I see it's listed next in the guide.
Yeah, Canada's a really interesting case. I mean, they have a great reputation for being inclusive, but there's a catch.
Oh.
Their system is based on altruistic surrogacy,
Huh.
meaning surrogates can only be compensated for like direct expenses related to the pregnancy.
So no payment for their time or anything like that?
Right.
Wow, I didn't even realize that was a thing. It sounds admirable, but honestly, it also seems like it could make finding a surrogate much harder.
You're absolutely right. I mean, while Canada has a strong legal framework that protects the rights of both parents, that altruistic model can definitely limit the pool of available surrogates,
Right.
which often translates into even longer wait times than in the U.S., which is something to think about.
That's a good point. So it seems like you're often weighing cost against speed and availability.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that's a tough decision to make. It's like,
Yeah.
how long are you willing to wait and how much you're willing to spend?
Yeah.
Are there any other trade-offs to consider between, like, the U.S. and Canada?
Well, you brought up something really important earlier, legal security.
Mhm.
Even though both countries have strong legal frameworks, there are some key differences.
Okay.
In the U.S., you often have like a pre-birth order, which legally recognizes both parents before the child is even born.
Okay.
Canada typically relies on like second parent adoption post-birth,
Yeah.
which can add, extra steps and time to the process.
Okay, so even though both countries are considered legally secure, there are nuances in how they handle parentage.
Absolutely.
That's definitely something to dig deeper into, especially if you're someone who values having everything legally settled before the baby arrives.
Mhm.
I see the guide also mentions lifestyle as a factor,
Mhm.
but honestly, with everything else we've been discussing, does that really matter?
It's definitely less critical than legal rights and medical care,
Yeah.
but it can impact your overall experience. Think about it. You might be spending months in the country, attending appointments, getting settled. Feeling comfortable and having access to familiar things
Right.
can make a big difference, especially during an already emotional time.
Okay, so the vibe of the place actually matters. You're not just choosing a country. You're choosing where to spend a significant chunk of time.
Yeah.
That's a good perspective. So we've talked about North America, but this guide also mentions some countries in South America and Africa.
Hmm.
I'm guessing cost is a big factor there.
It certainly is. Places like Colombia and Mexico often come up as more affordable alternatives.
Okay.
But as you mentioned earlier, there are always trade-offs.
Yeah, I see the guide mentions that Colombia is an emerging market. That sounds exciting, but also maybe a bit risky. What are your thoughts on balancing cost with the stability of a more established system?
That's a great question, and it's a dilemma many intended parents face.
Yeah.
Colombia, for example, is known for its high-quality medical care and is becoming increasingly popular for surrogacy. They've got, skilled doctors, modern clinics, but their legal framework is still developing compared to somewhere like the U.S.
So you might save money, but you might also be navigating more legal uncertainties. That's a tough call. What about Mexico? I see the guide specifically mentions Cancun and Tabasco. Sounds like a vacation.
Well, those regions are known for their welcoming atmosphere, and the cost of surrogacy can be significantly lower than in the U.S. or Canada.
Okay.
But as with any country, it's crucial to research the specific regions and their regulations.
So even within a country, there can be major differences depending on where you go.
Right.
This is getting complicated.
It definitely highlights the importance of thorough research. Mexico, for instance, has varying laws regarding surrogacy,
Yeah.
depending on the state. Some regions are very open
Yeah.
and have established procedures for same-sex couples, while others might be less defined.
Okay, so due diligence is key here. You can't just assume that because a country is known for being surrogacy friendly, it's automatically smooth sailing.
Right.
What about the last two on the list? Argentina and South Africa. They seem a little less talked about.
They're definitely newer to the scene, especially when it comes to same-sex surrogacy. Both countries have potential benefits like affordability and welcoming cultures, but they also present unique challenges.
Well, like what kind of challenges?
Well, Argentina, for instance, has seen some legal back and forth regarding surrogacy, so the landscape can feel a bit unpredictable.
Right.
And with South Africa, while they're known for excellent medical care, they've had cases where the legal process for confirming parentage
Okay.
for both intended parents has been complex.
Okay, so maybe not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
It seems like with those countries, you really need to be prepared to navigate some potential bumps in the road. This guide goes beyond just listing the countries, though. There are whole sections on donor options, legal parentage, and cultural acceptance. It seems like those are the things that really trip people up.
Absolutely. Choosing a country is just the first step.
Yeah.
Then you've got these other major considerations that can significantly impact your journey.
Let's start with donors. I see that same-sex couples obviously need either an egg or a sperm donor, depending on the situation. Is that something that varies much from country to country?
It can, significantly.
Okay.
Some countries have huge established donor databases, offering a wide variety of choices. Others have more limited options, which can mean longer wait times or a more restricted selection. This is especially important if you have, specific preferences
Right.
about the donor's background or
Oh,
characteristics.
so even if you found like the perfect country, you might run into roadblocks
Right.
with finding the right donor.
Right.
It's like a whole other layer of decision making. And what about the legal stuff? I'm getting a little stressed just thinking about birth certificates
Right.
and making sure both parents are legally recognized. Is that something you have to worry about everywhere?
You definitely do, and it varies wildly from country to country. In some places, both intended parents are automatically listed on the birth certificate, no problem. But in others, the non-biological parent might have to go through a separate adoption process, which can be time-consuming and costly.
So again, it goes back to doing your homework
Hmm.
and understanding the specific laws in each country.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a good lawyer is essential no matter where you go. But even if everything's legally sound, I guess there's still the human element to consider. This guide mentions cultural acceptance. Is that really something to worry about if you're going somewhere that's legally open to surrogacy?
Unfortunately, yes, even in countries with progressive laws, societal attitudes can vary greatly. You might encounter judgment or negativity from healthcare providers, locals, or even within your own support network.
That's so disheartening.
Yeah.
I mean, you're already going through such an emotionally charged experience. The last thing you need is to feel like you're being judged or discriminated against.
Right.
How can our listener practically assess this when researching different locations?
It's a tough one, but online forums and support groups can be really helpful.
Okay.
Connecting with other same-sex couples who've gone through surrogacy in a particular country can give you a sense of what to expect. They can share their personal experiences, both good and bad.
So real talk from people who've been there, that's invaluable. It seems like the more research you do, the better prepared you'll be.
Absolutely.
I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, though.
Yeah.
How is anyone supposed to choose the right country? With all this information swirling around, what should our listener focus on first?
It's definitely a lot to process,
Yeah.
but don't get discouraged. The good news is you've already started on the right track by gathering information. The key is to break it down into manageable chunks
Okay.
and prioritize what matters most to you.
So figure out your non-negotiables, the things you absolutely can't compromise on. Is it
Exactly.
legal security, cost, a particular time frame?
Yeah, once you've identified your top priorities, you can start comparing countries based on those factors. The guide is a great resource for that, providing a solid overview of each country's strengths and weaknesses.
You're right. It's like having a checklist.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Different countries, legal frameworks, donor options, cultural considerations. It's a lot to digest. What are some of the biggest mistakes people make when choosing a country for surrogacy?
One of the most common pitfalls I see is focusing too much on just one factor, like cost, without considering the potential downsides. It's important to remember that there are always trade-offs.
So don't be lured in by the promise of like a cheap and easy process
Forward.
without looking into the potential risks or complications.
Right.
What else?
Another mistake is not doing enough research. It's tempting to rely solely on what agencies tell you, but it's crucial to do your own independent digging.
Okay.
Connect with other intended parents, read legal documents, research specific clinics and doctors. The more informed you are, the better decisions you'll make.
Okay, so don't just blindly trust the marketing materials. Get into the nitty-gritty details.
Oh, yeah, Flick.
What about emotional considerations? Are there any mistakes people make on that front?
A big one is not fully considering the emotional impact of the entire journey.
Oh.
Surrogacy is a roller coaster of emotions, and it's important to have a strong support system in place. Talk to therapists, connect with support groups, and prepare yourself for the ups and downs.
That's such a good point. It's not just about logistics and legalities. It's about navigating a deeply personal and emotional experience.
Right.
I think we need to dig deeper into that.
Absolutely. There's so much more to explore when it comes to the emotional aspects of surrogacy, both for the intended parents and the surrogate herself.
This is getting really interesting. We've covered the basics of choosing a country, but now I'm realizing there's a whole other layer of considerations related to the emotional and personal side of this journey.
You're right. And honestly, those are often the things that make or break a surrogacy journey. The logistics are important, but the human element is what truly matters.
Okay, I am hooked. Let's take a quick break and then come back to unpack the emotional side of surrogacy. That's going to get deep.
All right. Diving back in, it's interesting that you bring up the emotional side of surrogacy because, believe it or not, this is often where intended parents stumble, not because of a lack of heart,
Right.
but because the legal and logistical hurdles can feel so all-consuming.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
If you're constantly worried about visas and contracts and court dates, it's got to be hard to also process like the emotional weight of what's happening.
Exactly. And remember, this journey isn't just yours. There's another person deeply involved as a surrogate.
Right.
Building a strong, healthy relationship with her is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so not just finding the right country.
Yeah.
But the right person within that country. This is where my anxiety would go through the roof. How do you even begin to build that kind of trust with someone you might not even know that well?
It starts with communication. Open, honest, and frequent communication before you even match with the surrogate. Discuss your expectations, values, and boundaries. Are you comfortable with her having a glass of wine occasionally? What about prenatal testing? Are your views aligned? These conversations might feel awkward at first, but they lay the groundwork for a healthy relationship.
That's a good point. You're not just building a baby together, you're navigating a very intimate and personal experience.
Yeah.
Are there any resources or tools that can help facilitate those conversations?
Absolutely. Many agencies and clinics encourage intended parents and surrogates to participate in joint counseling sessions.
Oh, okay.
It provides a safe and structured environment to discuss sensitive topics and work through potential conflicts.
So like couples therapy, but for surrogacy.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not just about preventing problems. It's about building a genuine connection, right?
Precisely. And it's an ongoing process, not just a one-time thing. Maintaining that open dialogue throughout the pregnancy is key.
Okay.
Share updates, photos, even worries. That shared vulnerability strengthens the bond and creates a sense of teamwork.
So it's almost like a chosen family forming, which is incredibly beautiful. But I imagine it can also be complex.
Yeah.
What happens when disagreements arise? I mean, let's be real. It's bound to happen at some point, right?
It definitely can, and that's where having a solid legal agreement in place is vital. A well-drafted contract outlines everyone's rights and responsibilities,
Right.
including decision-making authority in various scenarios.
So it's not just about protecting yourselves legally, but also providing a framework for navigating those tricky situations. That's reassuring, especially if you're someone who likes to have things clearly defined. But contracts aside, those emotional disagreements can still sting, especially when you form such a close bond with your surrogate. How do you handle that emotional fallout?
That's where those counseling sessions can really come in handy. Having a neutral third party to mediate and facilitate communication
Okay.
can help de-escalate conflicts and find common ground. Remember, even with the best intentions, disagreements are bound to happen. The key is to approach them with empathy and a willingness to compromise.
So essentially, treat it like any important relationship in your life. Communicate openly, respect boundaries, and be willing to work through the tough stuff. It sounds simple in theory, but I imagine it's a lot harder in practice.
It definitely takes effort, but the rewards are immeasurable. A successful surrogacy journey isn't just about bringing a child into the world. It's about the transformative relationships that are formed along the way.
You're making me want to sign up for surrogacy just for the friendship. But seriously, it's amazing to think about the power of human connection, especially in such a unique and challenging situation. Speaking of challenges, this guide mentions a lot about legal parentage. I know we touched on it earlier, but I feel like we need to unpack that a bit more.
You're right, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. Ensuring both intended parents have full legal rights to the child is absolutely essential. But the process varies significantly from country to country.
Okay, so let's break it down. I see the guide mentions something called pre-birth order. What is that exactly?
A pre-birth order is a legal document that recognizes both intended parents as the legal parents of the child, before the child is even born.
Okay.
It's often used in countries like the U.S., where surrogacy laws are well established, and same-sex parentage is widely recognized.
So it's like getting a head start on the legal paperwork,
Right.
ensuring everything's settled before the baby arrives. That sounds ideal. But I'm guessing it's not that simple everywhere. What happens in countries that don't recognize pre-birth orders?
In those cases, the non-biological parent often has to go through a separate legal process, typically called second-parent adoption or step-parent adoption, after the child is born.
Right.
This involves court appearances, home studies, and sometimes even psychological evaluations.
That sounds a lot more complicated and stressful. Are there any downsides to doing a second-parent adoption, even if it's the only option?
Well, one potential downside is the uncertainty. During that period after the birth, but before the adoption is finalized, the non-biological parent might not have automatic legal rights to the child, which can create complications, especially in emergency situations.
So if the biological parent were to suddenly become incapacitated or pass away, the other parent's legal rights might be in question.
Exactly. It's a worst-case scenario, but it's something to consider when weighing your options.
That's a scary thought.
Another potential downside is the emotional toll. Going through an adoption process, even if it's relatively straightforward,
Right, yeah.
can be emotionally draining, especially when you're already adjusting to life with a newborn.
It's like adding another layer of stress to an already overwhelming experience.
Yeah.
Okay, so pre-birth order is good if you can get it. But second-parent adoption is a solid backup option, even though it has its own set of challenges. This is where having a good lawyer, specializing in surrogacy law, is essential, right?
Absolutely. A lawyer who knows the ins and outs of the specific laws in your chosen country can make a huge difference in navigating the legal process smoothly and ensuring both parents are fully protected.
Okay, so we've covered legal parentage. What about donor options? I see this guide goes into a lot of detail about different types of donors and the selection process. Is that something our listeners should be thinking about early on?
Absolutely. Choosing a donor is a deeply personal decision, and it's often intertwined with your feelings about genetics, family history, and even your own identity.
It's like you're not just choosing someone to provide genetic material. You're choosing someone who will forever be connected to your child's story. That's a lot of pressure.
It definitely can be. Some intended parents feel strongly about having an anonymous donor, while others prefer an open arrangement where they can have contact with the donor, or even allow their child to connect with the donor later in life.
So it's a spectrum of openness, and it's up to each individual or couple to decide what feels right for them.
Right.
But how do you even begin to choose a donor? I imagine those profiles can be overwhelming, with so much information to consider.
It can be a lot to process, but most clinics and agencies have counselors who specialize in donor selection. They can help you narrow down your choices based on your preferences, values, and even physical characteristics.
So they can help you find a donor who's a good fit, not just genetically, but also in terms of personality, interests, and even worldview. That's really helpful. Is there anything else our listeners should be thinking about when it comes to donors?
One important thing to consider is the availability of donors in your chosen country.
Yeah.
Some countries like the US have large and diverse donor pools, while others have more limited options. This can impact your wait time and even your ability to find a donor who meets your specific criteria.
So you might find the perfect country, but then realize their donor pool is too small or doesn't offer the kind of diversity you're looking for. That's a good reminder to do your research on all fronts.
Mhm.
Okay, we talked about legal parentage, donor options, building relationships. Is there anything else that falls under the umbrella of emotional considerations?
One thing that's often overlooked is the importance of having a strong support system in place. Surrogacy can be emotionally taxing, and it's essential to have people you can lean on for encouragement advice and a shoulder to cry on.
That's so true.
Ah.
Who are some of the key people or resources our listeners should be reaching out to?
Family and friends are a great starting point, but it's also important to connect with others who have gone through surrogacy, either as intended parents or surrogates themselves.
Right.
Support groups, both online and in person, can provide a sense of community, shared understanding, and practical advice.
It's like having a tribe of people who get it, who've been there, and who can offer support without judgment. That's invaluable. Are there any other resources you recommend?
Therapists specializing in infertility and surrogacy can also be incredibly helpful. They can provide emotional support, coping mechanisms, and guidance in navigating the complex feelings that come with this journey.
So it's not just about the practical stuff. It's about taking care of your mental and emotional well-being.
Yeah.
Throughout the process, that's a good reminder that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And it's okay to ask for help along the way.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, and I'm feeling like we've just scratched the surface. Where do we go from here?
We've laid a solid foundation by exploring the emotional considerations and potential challenges. Now it's about taking that knowledge and applying it to your specific situation.
So if our listener sitting here feeling overwhelmed, but also excited about the possibility of surrogacy, what's the next step? How do they move from information gathering to action?
That's a great question, and one that deserves its own deep dive. Let's shift gears and talk about the practical steps involved in getting started with surrogacy.
Okay, I'm ready to get tactical. Let's
Yeah.
break it down into actionable steps our listener can take to turn their dream of parenthood into a reality. All right, so let's map out those next steps. I'm feeling a mix of like, this is possible, and whoa, where do I even start? Yeah, that's a very common reaction. It's exciting to see the path forward, but those first few steps can feel the most daunting. I think a good place to start is honestly assessing your resources.
Resources meaning like money. I know we talked about costs varying wildly.
Finances are a huge part of it, absolutely. But resources also mean time, emotional support, even your willingness to travel or relocate temporarily.
Right.
Surrogacy is a commitment on multiple levels.
Okay, so step one is some serious soul searching, figuring out what I can realistically handle. Then what?
Then it's about finding the right team.
Okay.
That means a lawyer specializing in surrogacy, preferably in your chosen country.
Okay.
They'll guide you through the legal maze, which is essential for protecting your rights and the surrogates.
Yeah, I'm starting to get why this guide emphasizes the legal stuff so much. It's not just paperwork. It's like the foundation of the whole journey.
Exactly. Next, you'll need a fertility clinic. Again, ideally one with experience in same-sex surrogacy and a good track record in your chosen location. They'll handle the medical side, egg retrieval, fertilization, embryo transfer, all that.
It's like building a dream team for the most important project ever. Any tips on vetting these professionals?
Don't be afraid to ask tough questions. What's their experience with cases like yours? What are their success rates? How do they handle emergencies or complications? And crucially, do they make you feel comfortable and understood?
Right.
Trust your gut.
That makes sense. This isn't just a transaction. It's a deeply personal journey. Speaking of which, how do you find the surrogate herself?
There are a few ways some intended parents work with agencies that specialize in matching surrogates and intended parents. Others find surrogates through their own networks or online communities.
Wait, online, like surrogacy forums? That seems both amazing and a little terrifying.
It can be both, honestly. But online communities can be a great way to connect with potential surrogates and get a feel for their personalities and motivations. Just remember to approach it with caution and always involve your lawyer
Right.
in any agreements or contracts.
Okay, so finding a surrogate is like a combination of professional matchmaking and, I don't know, like finding a new best friend.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just a medical arrangement.
That's a great way to put it. And once you've found a potential match, There's a whole process of getting to know each other, ensuring your values align, and building that trust that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of emotional heavy lifting, even before the pregnancy starts.
hmm
Any advice on navigating those initial conversations?
Be honest and open about your expectations and fears. Share your story, why you're choosing surrogacy, what kind of relationship you envision with the surrogate. Listen actively to her perspective, her motivations, her boundaries. This is where those joint counseling sessions can be really valuable.
It's like a first date.
hmm
That could last 9 months and beyond.
Right.
Okay, so assuming you found the perfect surrogate, you've got your legal team,
Yeah.
your clinic, what happens next?
Then the real adventure begins. There's medical screening for both the surrogate and the intended parents, legal contracts to finalize, and then the medical procedures themselves, egg retrieval, fertilization, and finally, embryo transfer.
This is where the science fiction starts to feel real. It's amazing to think about the level of medical expertise and coordination involved.
It truly is, and it's not just about the science, it's about supporting the surrogate throughout the pregnancy, attending appointments together, celebrating milestones, and preparing for the arrival of your child.
It's like a 9-month emotional roller coaster
Yeah.
with the highest stakes imaginable. And at the end of it all, you're holding your baby in your arms. It's hard to even wrap my head around that.
It's a journey unlike any other, filled with challenges, triumphs, and an overwhelming amount of love. It's not always easy, but for many intended parents, it's the most rewarding experience of their lives.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind. We've gone from feeling totally lost to having a roadmap, even if there are still a lot of unknowns. What's one final thought you'd leave our listener with as they embark on this adventure?
Remember that this is your journey. There's no right or wrong way to do surrogacy. Trust your instincts, ask for help when you need it, and never lose sight of the love that's driving this incredible journey.
Beautifully said. And to our listener, we're cheering you on every step of the way.